And indeed, one reason we are the most polluted is that we have been excluded from the theory and practice of environmental protection. Conferences like this are an effort to end that exclusion, and so I commend you for this continuing effort. Don't give it up. However, the concept of environmental justice is not just about the struggle to end the inequalities of environmental racism. This is the most important thing I think I can say today. There's a very widely used phrase in the environmental justice movement, and I want to repeat it. We don't want an equal piece of the same rotten carcinogenic pie. No queremos un pedazo igual del mismo pastel lleno de cáncer. It's not about equity. And I know I've heard that term used around here. It's a lot more. It's about transforming the system. What good does it do to be equitable in a poisonous environment? We all get equally polluted. We all get equally sick. Equity is not what the movement is about. Equity cannot be the measure of justice. We don't want an equal piece of the same rotten carcinogenic pie. This is an important saying in the movement that illustrates how our struggle is not just about ending toxic racism. It is about how we define a just and a sustainable society. The environmental justice movement is therefore a struggle to rethink how we work and live and how we produce and consume with an awareness of the impact of our livelihoods and lifestyles on ourselves, other people, and the earth and its life support systems. The environmental justice movement seeks to redefine what is understood by the term sustainable development. So it's not just about the struggle against environmental racism. That would be reactive. It's a proactive struggle as well to build a just and sustainable society. But what do we mean by sustainability? The term has been co-opted and abused since it was first used by the Brundtland Commission for the first Earth Summit in their famous book published in 1987, Our Common Future. Corporations now regularly use the term as if it were an exchangeable book cover, and indeed the concept is usually just window dressing that masks underlying abuses and continued exploitation of workers and the environment. What corporations mean by sustainable development is not the same as the way the concept is used by environmental justice activists. Let me clarify with an example that would be familiar to you in this agricultural valley. The organic agricultural sector has been taken over the last 10 years by the very same multinational corporations that control our global food system. Monsanto, a chemical and genetic engineering company, owns shares in 5 different organic food companies, including such well-known product lines as Cascadia Farms and Organic Valley. Do you think, for a moment, that the farm workers in these organic corporate farms have good recognition? Do you think they have collective bargaining agreements, higher wages, and better benefits? Yeah. The answer, I am sure you already know, is no. Farm workers in the organic sector are just as oppressed and as exploited as workers in more conventional agribusinesses. I recommend you read the study by Guthman on the organics industry in California. They may be slightly better off in the sense that they are not being exposed on a daily basis to pesticides and herbicides, but there are other remaining environmental risks in their workplaces, including excessively long hours under poor pay and conditions that can induce heat strokes and other ailments due to the abuse of workers by contractors and growers. The corporate takeover of organic agriculture has meant that while worker exposure to environmental risk may have been significantly reduced, the social justice dimensions of farm workers' struggles remain neglected. You can be environmentally sustainable and remain unjust, remain racist and anti-labor in your labor relations and working conditions. Indeed, many organic growers, and I've spoken to many of them, as well as other green corporations, like to argue that workers in their companies do not need labor unions because this is a new age company, like Whole Foods, of benevolent and sustainable capitalism, and besides, unions are just part of an old and maladaptive industrial form of organization that is no longer responsive to the needs of a globalized and information-based economy. Well, corporate organics is just as anti-union as the conventional agricultural sector. For the environmental justice movement, this means that we cannot have an environmentally sustainable society unless we also have ecological democracy based on worker control and public participation in decision and policy making. Over the course of the past 3 decades that have witnessed the rise to prominence of the environmental justice movement as not just a nationally prominent movement that has redefined environmentalism, but globally a very important movement. And since the start of the movement, issues related to public health have remained at the center of our struggles. Those of you here today are aware that our nation faces a public health crisis that is largely underpinned by the millions of workers and families that remain under or uninsured. Everyone is hoping that the Obama administration follows through on promises to move forward toward universal health coverage for all Americans. However, what about those resident workers and their families who are out-of-status immigrants? What about the millions of undocumented workers and their families who are already treated as a menace and a threat to our nation's security? There are several things we have to come to understand about the public health crisis and how it is viewed within the environmental justice movement. Like any other issue related to environmental injustice, the lack of access to affordable quality health care is a significant compounding factor that makes people of color and persons from low-income communities even more vulnerable to illness and morbidity from cumulative exposure to toxicants and stressors. We, meaning poor people, get sick more often from toxic hazards and are also more likely than other groups to lack access to medical care for our chronic and acute health problems. By the time we do get medical care, we're usually close to death in some emergency room. This mistreatment of our nation's workers and immigrants must end. Ya basta. In the social sciences, we have a term that is used to describe the conditions that limit access to affordable, quality health care. You're going to laugh, and I do this on purpose. That word is poverty. Now, the concept of poverty itself is very political. In our country, let's be honest, we don't like poor people. We view them as outcasts or failures who only have themselves to blame for their wretchedness. We watch with disdain while poor and homeless people rummage through dumpsters in search of their next meal and think, see, they are just too dirty and lazy to get a job. This racist stereotype flies in the face of the fact that most of the poor in the United States are working poor. Me da mucho coraje pensar en eso. How we define and view poverty is part of the problem of how we approach the values we place on public health and on environmental quality of life. Drawing from the work of my colega Vandana Shiva, a philosopher of science and ecofeminist activist from India, I want to propose that there are really 2 kinds of poverty. The first is the poverty of a right livelihood or a subsistence way of life. For Vandana, as well as for myself, this is not real poverty. People who are blessed and are soulful enough to live in place for millennia and be self-reliant, self-fed, and healthy, we should celebrate them. We should empower them to continue to follow this alternative pathway. But instead, people who practice right livelihoods and are well-fed, well-housed, and have access to all of the resources they need to be self-reliant and healthy,